sternoclavicular joint. I want to show you a picture. This is the sternoclavicular joint. This is where arthritis can set in, especially if someone has broke their clavicle in the past, and it can be very painful. There's not a whole lot we can do for that. At its distal end, the clavicle articulates with the acromion process of the scapula, and the acromion process of that. What is it? Next week when we go in live, I'll show you that acromion process on the skeleton. The humerus, remember, is the upper part of the arm. Remember I said when you want to identify the humerus, you want to look for this capitulum. Okay, some of you missed it on the exam, and I gave you a little hint. Remember I said it's humerus, it's funny, humerus. But look for that capitulum. You'll probably see it again on next week's exam.
It's not capitulum.
Capitulum, it's CAPITULUM, I think. Yeah. Is that right?
Yes.
Good, okay. You usually have to write it down. Okay. So the upper extremity is called the upper limb. The upper extremity consists of the bones of the shoulder girdle, upper and lower parts of the arm, wrist, and here. Here, the distal epiphysis, remember the epiphyses is at the ends of long bone. The only thing I want you to know about the humerus is the capitulum. The capitulum. That's it. And again, it shows it right here. The capitulum. What cartilage do we see at the end of long bones? Hyaline cartilage or articular cartilage. Good. And this is our bones in our lower arm. So we have the ulnar bone, which is on the pinky side, and we have the radial or radius, which is on the thumb side. So you want to know that. If I ask you about the bones in the lower arm, ulna, pinky side, radius, thumb side. And here's your styloid processes of the radius and the ulna. Remember I said we have the two styloid processes in the skull where the hyaline bone suspends from, and we have styloid processes on the radius and the ulna. That's the only two places of them in the body. Here's a better picture of that capitulum. Radius is on the thumb side. What do we call like the arm, the upper arm and the hip? What kind of joints are that? Yeah, the ball and socket joints. The positive thing about ball and socket joints is that the range of motion is outstanding, right? What's the negative side of a ball and socket joint? They can dislocate pretty easily, right? If you ever work in the ER, sometimes parents will bring their kids in with a dislocated shoulder because when they were walking them, they pulled them up like this. Okay, carpal bones. I want you to know all 8 carpal bones. Carpal bones are the wrist bones, and there's 8 of them. Carpal bones. Carpal bones are wrist bones. So a good way to remember these is to remember the mnemonic some lovers try positions that they can't handle. I didn't make this up.
Love the ER.
I know that. So, if you can remember, some lovers try positions that they can't handle. The first letter in each word gives you, the first letter of each carpal bone. So, the scaphoid bone, that's the S in some. The lunate bone, the triquetrum for tri, pisiform for positions, trapezoid for that, trapezium for they, capitate for can't, and hamate for handle. I want you to know all 8 of these. You want to be able to recognize all 8. And here is a really nice visual of these carpal bones. Okay. I want you to pay close attention to the scaphoid bone right here. Does everyone see that one? The scaphoid bone? It's of clinical significance because it's the most frequently broke of all the carpal bones. And the reason why is because when someone is falling, what do we tend to do? We tend to put our hands out, right, to kind of break the fall. But in the process, this scaphoid bone will hit the radius, because see how close it is to the radius? And it'll break. Now here's where it can be really serious. Miss Kitty, you know Miss Kitty, right? Yeah, she always says I pick on it, but, because I talk about old people, that's what she tells me. But with the elderly, sometimes they will fall and they break the scaphoid bone, but they won't say anything. So what they'll do is hold their arm like this. And then you'll ask them, what happened? Oh, I fell and I hurt my wrist. But it's okay, because if I keep it like this, it doesn't hurt, right? Well, it's a huge problem, because if this scaphoid bone, if a piece breaks off of it and it's by itself, now that piece is avascular, which means it's not getting a blood supply, which means it will become necrotic. And if it becomes necrotic, what happens? What can happen? Infection will set in, and our poor patient who thought, they just hurt their wrist can die from sepsis because of a necrotic scaphoid bone that has broken off. So it's very, very important that if a patient falls and they hurt their wrist, they need to get it checked out as soon as possible. Pelvic girdle is made up of the sacrum and 2 coxal bones bound tightly to strong ligaments. Each coxal bone is made up of 3 bones that are fused together, and that's ilium, ischium, and pubis. Here's your ilium. Remember, that's the large bone. Here's your pubis. Here's the ischium. I may put a picture of this on your exam, and have an arrow pointing to this and say, what is this? And you're going to tell me it's the ilium. Or I could have an arrow pointing to this. This is the coccyx. This is the sacrum. And the obturator foramen. That's a nice foramen. I may label that one as well. Okay. Obturator foramen. Speaking of arthritis, another place that we can develop arthritis is right here in the sacroiliac joint. And And again, if you have elderly patients, that's exactly what they're going to say, believe it or not. They're gonna come in and they're gonna say, my sacroiliac joint is acting up. I'm not kidding, that is what they will say. And it's because of the arthritis in this center. So basically, every time they walk, they feel that it's like bone on bone. It's really painful. Let's see. Ilium, you want to know, is the largest and uppermost bone. The ischium is the strongest and the lowermost bone. And the pubis is the most anterior. It's in the front. Okay. So, what's the largest bone in the body? The femur. And what are the two lower bones in our legs? Do you know what they're called? Yeah, the tibia and the fibula. Which one is the largest out of the two? Tibia or fibula? The tibia. One way to remember that, I used to think tibia and thick, okay, because it's thicker than the fibula. Or the fibula is like the finer of the two bones. You want to know the patella is the largest sesamoid bone in the body, moving cavity. The other one's in the thumb. The only one you're responsible for is the kneecap, the patella. Again, the tibia is the larger, stronger, and more medially and superficially located of the two leg bones. And of course, with your femur, the common breaks is usually in the neck area here. Okay, not always, but that's a real common place. And just remember, if we do break the femur, we worry about fat emboli breaking off, we worry about blood clots, because it is the largest bone in the body. But very hard to break because it can actually withstand almost 1 ton of pressure. I mean, that's a lot. Now, of course, if the patient has osteoporosis, it's not going to be as strong. Here's your fibula and the lower leg. Here's your tibia. Here's the patella. The structure is similar to that of the hand, but of course the bones are bigger because it has to what? Support weight. And I'm not going to test you on the bones of the feet. Just want you to know that we have the normal arch that we should have. Some people have a flat foot, which can cause what? Plantar fasciitis. It can cause knee issues down the road. It can cause lower back issues. Like I said, kids, it's not really such a big deal. But what can we do now? We can do what? We have the arch supports that can help with this.
So it's good for people that have flat feet to wear arch shoes.
It is. It really will help. Even when they're younger, you start out young. Yeah, it's very, very helpful. This, I just wanted to start. How many of you wear high heels? Oh, good. You got a few. My high heel days are over. But I used to wear them, believe it or not. And what it does over time is that it causes lots of pressure on these metatarsal heads, and it can cause the feet to hurt really bad. she said that, I saw an interview with her one time, and she said she never worked out, that she would park as far as she could away from things, and just walk with her heels in. And, yeah, so, I don't know, I guess this didn't affect her. Skeletal differences between men and women. You want to know about the male and female pelvis. The male pelvis is deep, funnel shaped with a very narrow pubic arch. The female is shallow, broad, and flaring with a wider pubic arch. Why is that? For childbirth. The pelvic outlet is known as the imaginary plane. The pelvic arch in the male is less than a 90-degree angle. And this shows the difference. You see how narrow that is compared to the female? And also, and you don't have to know this, just for an FYI, the coccyx in a female is softer than in a male. And the reason being, it's for childbirth, so that it will, it's more flexible. So it's kind of interesting. Changes in the skeleton begin at fertilization and continue over a lifetime. Dense bone structures of young and middle-aged adults permits these individuals to bear heavy loads. In later adulthood, we have a reduced bone density. It makes fractures more likely and causes changes in posture and overall height, which means I'm going to shrink. I'm going to be shorter. That's not fair. Changes in the skeleton can be positive or negative. The incompletely ossified skeleton of children provides the resiliency needed to withstand stress without breaking easily. Okay, so some of it is positive. The skeletal system is a good example of increasing structural hierarchy in the body. Skeletal tissues are grouped into discrete organs, which are bones. Skeletal system is more than a collection of individual bones. Integration of the skeletal system with other body organ systems permit homeostasis. Okay, so let's talk about bone fractures. We can have several different types of bone fractures. The most common cause is trauma. And then we have what is known as pathological or spontaneous fractures. And that's where the weakness results in breakage despite very little stress. So like I said, sometimes patients can break their hip just turning over in bed. And then when they go to get up, they fall. And they'll say, oh, I fell and broke my hip, but that's really not true. In reality, they broke their hip while they were still there. Okay, so it happens quite frequently in the elderly, which can be mad at me for saying. Stress fractures occur in the absence of any clinically visible damage. You ever have a stress fracture? These are terrible because there's nothing you can do, and I'll show you. Let me just show you a picture of one real quick. So here's a stress fracture. It's from being on your feet too much, and I had one of these one time, and it was hard. It took forever to heal because I'm always on my feet. I'm always walking around, and oh my gosh, I mean it's super painful. And the best thing to do is to rest. Is to rest it. I mean, it would heal much faster if you could stay off of it. But when you're talking about your feet, that's kind of hard to do, right? A displaced open fracture, this is a compound fracture, but you want to know the other two terms, displaced or open. That's where the bone breaks through the skin. Okay? It always requires surgery, always, always, always. And it always requires antibiotics, because at that point, that infection will set in, and they absolutely have to have antibiotics, usually by IV. So a bone fracture is defined as a partial or complete break in the continuity of a bone that most often occurs under mechanical stress. Most fractures can be identified visually during physical examination or on a standard radiograph. The displaced segment fracture or compound is one in which the broken bone projects through the surrounding tissue and skin. Non-displaced or closed fractures do not cause a break in the skin. And these sometimes, will just heal their own. We can immobilize them, they just heal. A complete fracture involves a break across the entire section of the bone, whereas an incomplete fracture involves only a partial break, in which the bone fragments are still partially joined. And that's compound, obviously. So here, remember I said that in the neck is where we usually see a lot of these femur breaks. We can do a couple things when we break the femur or the hip. We can do pins, or we can do a complete hip replacement with the ball and socket. It's pretty amazing now what we can do. And it wasn't that long ago when if someone broke a hip, we basically made them comfortable until they died. Right? That's how bad it was back then. Now people in their 80s and 90s that break a hip are getting hip surgery. And they're, it's amazing. And now it's actually, the recovery time for a broken hip is actually better than the knee, when you have your knee replaced. So it's still though a high death rate though when someone, an elderly person breaks their hip, because they have other things going on, a heart condition, diabetes. We're getting better with meds. They got new medication out to try to help with osteoporosis. There's another compound that mirrors your stress fracture. And then shin splints. You can have anterior shin splints, which are in the front, or you can have posterior shin splints in the back. Usually caused by what? Repetitive movement, like running. I used to love running, but it's really bad. Why is running bad for you? Yeah, it puts so much pressure on the knees and the hips, but it's fun. But they're recommending now like a really brisk walk.